Welcome you. Today on the deep dive, we're zeroing in on a question many have likely pondered. Why isn't Taiwanese, or spoken by more people in Taiwan?
And interestingly, during the Japanese colonial period, Taiwanese, based largely on the Amoy, or Xiamen, dialect of Minnan, which kind of became a standard, was still widely used. The Japanese, while promoting Japanese as the official language, even published quite a few bilingual Japanese-Taiwanese dictionaries.
That's telling.
It really highlights that despite Japanese being the official language, Taiwanese remain, a vibrant and commonly spoken language in everyday life.
So what triggered the big shift away from such widespread usage? This is where the nationalist government, the KMT, comes into the picture, right?
Yeah, that's the turning point. If we connect this to the bigger historical picture, the end of World War II and the arrival of the KMT government from mainland China in the late 1940s marked a real watershed moment. They brought with them a massive influx of people and established Mandarin Chinese, the sole official national language.
And then came the national language movement. It sounds like it wasn't just about, having a common language for practical reasons.
That's a crucial insight. I mean, while the stated aim was to facilitate communication across different groups, the implementation of the national language movement was quite aggressive, especially when it came to languages other than Mandarin. It was very heavily promoted in the media, in all public spaces, and maybe most significantly, within the education system. The clear goal was assimilation, basically, to assimilate the younger generation by essentially prohibiting the use of other languages, Taiwanese, Hakka, indigenous languages in schools.
Wow. So children were actively stopped from speaking their own mother tongues in the classroom.
Exactly. Now, initially, there was a very brief period right after the war where Taiwanese could be used sort of as a bridge to teach Chinese in elementary schools. But that didn't last long under the KMT's firm language policy. A key strategy, and a pretty damaging one, was to create this false division between Mandarin and so-called dialects. Speaking these dialects, including Taiwanese, was deliberately framed as being uncivilized or backward.
That sounds incredibly harmful.
Oh, it was. This tactic created a sense of self-consciousness, even shame, among many people, particularly younger generations. It pushed them towards Mandarin to avoid stigma and, get ahead.
That must have done real damage to people's sense of identity and connection to their heritage. Were there specific policies, like actual rules, that enforced this?
Oh, yes, there were many. Let's look at some concrete examples from the sources that really illustrate the extent of this effort.
Yeah.
Around 1953, they banned Taiwanese interpreters in cinemas.
Oh.
So if you didn't speak Mandarin well, good luck understanding the movie.
Right, cutting off access.
Exactly. And even more culturally impactful was the systematic suppression of Taiwanese songs. Singing them was labeled low class, which ironically led to this kind of fascinating, though sad, phenomenon. A surge in Taiwanese artists covering popular Japanese songs, but with Taiwanese lyrics. It was a way to keep the language in music despite the restrictions.
That's quite poignant, isn't it? Finding a way around it. What other measures did they take?
Well, in 1956, the Speak Mandarin movement was officially launched. Mandarin became compulsory in all official and public settings. They used slogans actively linking Mandarin to patriotism, implying speaking Taiwanese was somehow, less loyal.
And the schools, you mentioned punishments.
Yes, within schools, the punishments for speaking Taiwanese were often harsh and designed to be humiliating. Students could be fined, and these fines weren't trivial amounts for kids back then. They might be forced to wear dog tags or other signs of shame, or even face physical punishment.
Dog tags?
Seriously. There's a telling anecdote in the sources about how a bowl of noodles cost maybe 2 new Taiwan dollars, while pulling a basket of peanuts might earn 8. Imagine being fined a significant chunk of that just for speaking your own language.
Wow, those examples really bring home the immense pressure, the very real consequences. And this wasn't just schools and public spaces, was it? The media felt it too.
Absolutely. Media was heavily controlled. Restrictions were placed on using Taiwanese, leading to really strict limitations on TV and radio programming in Taiwanese. A 1972 rule, for instance, limited Taiwanese television broadcasts to just 1 hour per station per day.
Just 1 hour?
And often split into 2 very short broadcasts. Radio stations were similarly limited, maybe 2 Taiwanese songs per day, maximum. This severely cut people's exposure to the language and popular culture.
Yeah, marginalizing it further, I recall reading about a very popular puppet show that got canceled abruptly. What happened there?
Yes. That was Yunzu Darushia, back in 1970. It was incredibly popular, like almost everyone watched it. But the government pressured the creators to include pro-China content, trying to control the narrative.
So propaganda.
Pretty much. When the showrunners resisted, the program was just canceled. The official excuse was flimsy, something about disrupting farmers' and workers' normal routines. But it was a clear message. The government wanted control over cultural expression and wanted to promote their language and ideology.
It really sounds like a deliberate, sustained campaign to systematically erase Taiwanese from public life and diminish its value.
That's precisely the case. You even had officials making public statements reinforcing this. In 1975, a legislator named Mu Chao dismissed dialects as lacking a proper written form. He explicitly called Taiwanese a backward dialect, not worth preserving, arguing Mandarin was essential for being Chinese. That kind of official talk further stigmatized the language.
And they had a long-term goal for this.
It seems so. As Song Chuyu, who later became governor of Taiwan province, stated back in 1980, the government's plan was to gradually reduce and eventually eliminate Taiwanese language programming on TV altogether. The aim was a complete shift to Mandarin broadcasting.
So what was the long-term fallout from all these policies? It must have deeply affected how the language was used and passed down.
The impact was, well, significant and long-lasting. These policies led to a clear, measurable decline in the everyday use of Taiwanese. It created a serious crisis in intergenerational language transmission. You had older generations, fluent speakers, who often didn't consistently speak Taiwanese with their kids or grandkids.
Why not?
Sometimes it was wanting their children to succeed in a Mandarin-dominant world. Sometimes maybe they'd internalized the negative messages about their own language. So as a result, younger generations lacked that consistent exposure, and they didn't have the tools or opportunities to get fully fluent or feel comfortable expressing themselves in Taiwanese.
And we see that reflected in the numbers today, don't we?
Absolutely. By 2020, statistics showed only about 31.7% of the population used Taiwanese as their primary language at home. What's really concerning is the sharp drop in younger age groups. For kids aged 6 to 14, it was only around 7.4% using it as their main language.
Only 7.4%.
Yeah. And this trend has led some scholars to make some pretty alarming predictions that without much stronger preservation efforts, Taiwanese could potentially disappear by the late 21st or early 22nd century.
That's a really stark warning. Are there efforts being made to counter this? I think I saw something about a language test.
Yes, the Ministry of Education started offering the Taiwanese Minnan Language Proficiency Test, OCHE, back in 2010. So that's definitely a sign of some government recognition and an effort to encourage learning. However, a 2017 observation pointed out that even after years of having mother tongue education in schools, well, as an elective, the actual fluency of young people hasn't significantly jumped. Issues with pronunciation, limited vocabulary often persist, probably due to limited class time and lack of, immersive environments. And it's important to remember this Mandarin policy wasn't just about Taiwanese. It hit Hakka, indigenous languages, even the dialects mainlanders brought with them.
Right. So after decades of this suppression, what changed? When did the fight for language rights start gaining ground?
Well, the lifting of martial law in the late 1980s was key. It opened up space for a real resurgence of interest in Taiwan's local cultures and languages. There was a growing push to revitalize these languages that had been pushed aside for so long. Mother tongue education started as an elective in schools in '93 under Li Tenghui, and then became part of the official curriculum in 2000 under Chen Shui-bian.
Okay, so steps were taken.
Yes, but the actual instruction time dedicated to these languages, including Taiwanese, was still way less than the time spent on Mandarin.
And this brings us to that whole struggle for a dedicated Taiwanese TV channel. It seems amazing it took so long for that to happen, given how many people historically spoke the language.
It really does. Grassroots groups and activists advocated for a Taiwanese channel for years. They often pointed out the irony languages with far fewer speakers, like indigenous languages and Hakka, got their own public TV channels much earlier.
When were those set up?
Hakka TV and indigenous television were established during the Chen Shui-bian administration, and Hakka Radio came later under Tsai Ing-wen. The Public Broadcasting Service, OYO, actually had plans for a Taiwanese channel way back in 2007, but they kept getting stalled, mostly because of budget problems, especially under the Ma Ying-jeou administration.
So it sounds like there was real political pushback against a Taiwanese channel.
There certainly was. During a budget review in 2018, the proposal faced significant opposition. Some KMT legislators openly questioned if it was even necessary. They suggested the money could be better used elsewhere, even, bizarrely, to buy back shares of China television.
Wow.
Yeah. One legislator even questioned calling Minnan Taiwanese, suggesting maybe indigenous languages were more deserving of that name, basically arguing it was an unnecessary expense.
But despite all that, the channel did eventually launch, didn't it?
Yes, finally. A really significant step was the passage of the National Languages Development Act, OYO, in December 2018. This was landmark legislation. It officially recognized all of Taiwan's indigenous languages, crucially, including Taiwanese and Hakka, as national languages. It guaranteed their equal status and protected against discrimination.
So that law paved the way.
Exactly. It provided the legal basis for the budget allocation. And then, on July 1st, 2019, the public television Taiwanese channel, Warrior Time, finally launched. The very first fully Taiwanese language TV channel in Taiwan's history.
It's quite something thinking about how long that fight took, especially given the deep roots the language has for so many people there. Are there contemporary signs maybe of hope for its future, people advocating for it?
Absolutely. We are seeing examples. People like Janet Shea or Jensen Huang, Taiwanese heritage speakers living abroad, using it and talking about its importance. Huang's recent interactions where he deliberately spoke Taiwanese, even playfully quizzing a reporter in English like, "Don't you understand Taiwanese?" Those moments get noticed.
Yeah, they make a statement.
They signal a renewed pride, maybe, and a desire to see it used more openly.
And the language itself still shows traces of that history, right? Like the Japanese influence.
Yes, that's a fascinating layer. Because of the Japanese colonial period, Taiwanese picked up quite a few Japanese loanwords. Some are still common today, like pianso for toilet or ei gasu for gas. That history left its mark on the vocabulary. And it's worth remembering, too, Taiwanese isn't just spoken. It has a history of being written using romanization, A, back in the 19th century, and later using Chinese characters. It shows it's always been a language capable of full expression.
So to kind of bring it all together, the reasons why fewer people speak Taiwanese today, it's really this complex mix of historical forces, isn't it?
Precisely. It fundamentally boils down to that historical suppression through deliberate, often harsh, language policies under the KMT. Then there's the societal stigma that was actively created around speaking it. And the direct result was that major disruption in passing the language down naturally between generations.
Right. And the fact that the dedicated TV channel arrived so late, it's like a symbol of that whole history, but also maybe a crucial step for the future.
Exactly. It's quite remarkable, really, that despite decades of being systematically marginalized, the language has persisted. The TV channel, the National Languages Development Act, these are huge milestones. But the big question, the one lingering, is, given this whole complicated history, what does the future hold for Taiwanese? What roles can different generations play now to ensure it doesn't just survive, but actually thrives in everyday life? It really makes you think about the power of language, doesn't it? And how important it is to hold on to that cultural heritage.